Crime and Punishment by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Now, fair warning on this, I don't have anything intelligent to say. I've committed myself to this project of reviewing every book I've read, but this one I don't have anything intelligent to say about it, so yeah, fair warning. Part of the reason I don't have anything intelligent to say, I think, is because I did this as an audiobook. Now, I've mentioned before that I'm a big fan of listening to audiobooks. I usually listen to them while driving or while I'm puttering around in my apartment. And it allows me to get through a lot more books because it's time that I ordinarily would not have for reading, time for driving. Recently, I've also decided that audiobooks is also the best way to get through all those books that I know I probably should read, but realistically I'm probably never going to get around to. Like Crime and Punishment, a book I doubt I would have had the patience to sit down and read cover to cover otherwise. All that being said, audiobooks have some disadvantages as well. While I was listening to the audio, I felt like the book was just kind of washing over me. I wasn't fully absorbing all of it. I think maybe I probably should listen to it a few more times before I really form an intelligent opinion. But again, I've committed myself to this book review project, so I'm going to try and jot down a few thoughts, just kind of whatever comes to me. My image of a Dostoevsky book is a long book with very little story, consisting mainly of characters making long speeches to each other. So, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that Crime and Punishment at least had several subplots running through it, which helped to keep the story interesting. I'm not sure if even all of these subplots were enough to justify the book's huge length. Brevity is obviously not Dostoevsky's strength, but there was at least more action in the book than I expected. What I found most interesting about this book was actually not the book itself. It was the publisher's introduction, which was included on the audiobook. In the introduction, they talk about Dostoevsky's conversion from a young socialist to a religious conservative. Dostoevsky and his young radical friends did little bit more than make a toast to revolution in the 1840s. But in 1840s Europe, this was dangerous enough that he was arrested and sentenced to death. As he was standing before the firing squad, a messenger on a horse galloped up at the last minute to announce that he had been pardoned. Now, this whole last-minute pardon was planned ahead of time. It was all part of a plot to scare young intellectuals. Still shaking from the experience, Dostoevsky was led off to Siberia to a work camp for several years, where his only allowed reading material was the Bible. Then when his time in Siberia was up, he was made to serve in the army for several years. And when he came back to St. Petersburg, he was no longer the same man. He had become a religious conservative and a firm believer in Tsarism, like the divine right of the Tsar. Now, I couldn't help but think that if Dostoevsky had lived 100 years later in communist Soviet Union, and he had started off as a religious person who had been who had been converted to socialism by kind of those same methods, people would call it communist brainwashing, and they disregard everything he had to write after his conversion. Of course, that's not to try and take away from his brilliance or try and make any cheap shots at Crime and Punishment or any of his other conservative views. It's just something I couldn't help thinking about when I heard this introduction. So in the book, Crime and Punishment, Dostoevsky, or at the very least one of his characters, argues against the socialist doctrine that all crime is economically motivated. Seems to be a fair point, but maybe a bit of a straw man. I mean, even in the 1860s, there was great diversity of opinion among the socialists. Not all socialists believed, even at the time, that all crime was economically motivated. And even if they did, that's just one point of a larger platform. And demolishing this point does not demolish socialism in general. But I'm nitpicking. That wasn't the main point of the book. The main point of the book was against the idea of killing for a cause. The main character believes his crime is justified because of his intellectual theory. And I think Dostoevsky does an excellent job of demolishing this idea. Dare I say this, every captured terrorist should be made to read this book as part of their rehabilitation program. But then, let us be consistent. If it's wrong for the young intellectual to kill for a cause, then it's wrong for the government authorities to kill as well. Now, I think Dostoevsky understands this. He makes several references to Napoleon, and not in a flattering way. So Napoleon thought he was kind of above the law, and Dostoevsky and his characters believed that Napoleon was not. So in that case, he is coming down on a government of sorts. I mean, Napoleon was the government of France for a time. But he never seems to come down on the Tsar. I mean, is the Tsar kind of bound by the same rules? Dostoevsky was a believer in Tsarism, right? So what would he think about that? I don't know. I'm going to close this review with the same sentiment with which I opened it. I really haven't fully absorbed this book yet. I'm going to need to re-listen to it, reread it, and then maybe I'll come back with a more intelligent critique. In the meantime, I welcome any comments from anyone who has any more insight into this book than I do.